But Sam, I guess, can you start by talking about how you became involved with this project?
About 2.5 years ago, Michael Cantor, the executive producer, reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to get involved with this documentary about Sammy Davis Jr. And Steve and I had done previous American Masters, and my answer was, there was no hesitation on my part. I said yes. I had grown up with Sammy Davis Jr., watching him on the Ed Sullivan Show, and movies like Ocean's 11 and Sergeant's 3, and so it was like feeling like old home week to jump into a film about Sammy Davis Jr.
The film is so lucid in the way that it encapsulates the many facets of Sammy's life, but it's also dynamic because it doesn't really follow a strict chronology. I'm curious to hear more about your process in sort of structuring the film and where the framework begins, if it's research or if it falls into the editing stages.
Well, originally, Michael Cantor worked with Larry Maslin, who was a writer and also the producers on the film. And they had written a very extensive and in-depth script that they sent to the National Endowment of Humanities, where they got the first amount of funding. And in that script, Larry had started writing a long sort of narrative and was trying to do it in terms of Sammy's specific things in his career as a dancer, as an impressionist, as a singer. And Steve and I, basically, we sort of took the template and ran with it. We compressed it because it was going to be a long script. But that was sort of the original idea. It came from Larry Maslin, the writer of the film. The big challenge was how to try to get into as much of Sammy's life as we could within 100 minutes. You know, and Steve is a fabulous editor, and I know he was feeling very challenged when he first started. Why don't you tell him, Steve?
Well, there was a lot of material to go through. We had about 250 hours worth of material, and then 40,000 or more stills. Many of them that Sammy shot himself. And so it was a daunting task to piece it together.
All the stills, many of the stills you see in the end credits were all Sammy stills that he shot himself. You know.
And we decided, we tried to make the film and succeeded without a narrator. So all the interviews worked, and we tried to put them together seamlessly. I'm sorry. We tried to make the film without a narrator and succeeded.
Because originally in the first pass, Larry had written in narration. And so we tried to do a rough sort of pass with narration, and we realized as we got to that first assembly of the film that we didn't think narration could work, was necessary, and Steve was right. We just started to be able to find the interviews to make the things, you know, come together. I will also do a shout out to one of the key persons who were interviewed. Where's Will? Will Freeball, who's out there. Wonderful writer. So, you know,
we were lucky that Sam was prolific in his interviews. And so part of the interviews were for a book that was co-written, his autobiography, and he was on many talk shows, so we had access to that material, which really helped.
And that's an amazing thing to happen, where you have your subject basically narrating his own story. And Sammy, as you can see, he loved to talk. He loved to talk. And on those audio tapes, for example, when he's talking about how he felt very hurt at being rejected at JFK's inaugural, that was from that audio for his book. I mean, Sammy was a very open and sensitive man, as we all know. And you see it, you hear it, in sort of every frame of this film.
So with this amount of sources, and you use archival, scholarly, anecdotal, was there a particular source that really struck you, either as something profound or as a rarity, or something that really put everything else into place?
Well, there's a couple of things that I had never really seen before, and then when we found them and Steve put them together, it was like an amazing moment for me. One of them is when you see Sammy dancing with the two drummers, which was from some television show in the late 50s. I had never seen that footage. And when Steve put that sequence together, one of the first things he said, we don't want to really cover it up with too much dialogue. I want to see that dancing. I want to hear the drumming. And when Steve put it together and I went into the editing room and watched it one day, I was like mesmerized. This guy was a phenomenal dancer. I had seen Sammy dance, lots of times, but never to that extent. So that was an amazing, amazing piece of footage. And the other piece of footage that really sticks with me, I had seen this before, but in the context of the film, it's really very powerful, is when Sammy and Gregory Hines were dancing together. It's just it's just sublime.
I also want to point out that Sammy died 8 weeks after that memorial. So, pretty amazing.
I guess on the flip side of that, was there a part of Sammy's life that proved particularly challenging to convey on screen, either through lack of sources or maybe an interview that you couldn't get?
The toughest part, I think, for us to be able to deal with, because no one really talks about it, is really those last 12, 13 years of his life when he spent time with Altaviz, his third wife. We don't deal with Altaviz. And no one really talked about Altaviz. I mean, she was in some footage, but there wasn't much that was said about her. So that's the one thing that is really sort of missing from the film, But luckily I haven't gotten too beaten up by anybody yet.
We can start taking some questions from the audience. Yes, your hand up right there. Yep.
When will this be on PBS?
It'll be on in May, American Masters.
I cannot wait to see it again.
Yeah, in May.
Also, I'm in the entertainment industry. I represent actors, and I'm so glad this will be broadcast in May, because a lot of young people that I meet from musical theater schools, the different theater schools that come out, and the name Sammy Davis Jr. will be mentioned to 22, 23-year-olds, and they don't know who he is. And I was lucky enough when I was 14 years old to be at a matinee of Golden Boy, and that after the show, when he took his final bow, his personal conductor went into the pit. He sat on the foot of the stage and did a half an hour of his act. And it's more than 50 years ago. I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Wow, that's great.
The fact that he was the greatest entertainer of all time is not a cliche. It's a God-given fact.
Wow.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, ma'am, White?
Thank you.
There'll be a mic that'll come to you in a moment.
Thank you, wonderful work. I was just curious, were the children at all contacted in the making of this film, and what are they doing now?
We were in touch with his oldest child, Tracy. We had tried to set up an interview with her. She lives in Nashville, and she had said she would do an interview. I hired a crew. I flew to Nashville, and she never showed up. And she never responded to any of my communications through text or phone calls or emails. So I don't know if she's seen the film or will she ever see the film. His other two children with my Brit, they both live in LA and they're not in the business. And then him and Altaviz adopted a son, Manny Davis, who was very, very involved in helping us to collect to go into the archive. He saw the film in Los Angeles about 2 months ago, and he was very pleased. And there was a screening yesterday at the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival, and I heard Manny was there. So that's the one child of his that has really sort of been very involved with the film.
Yes, sir, right in front.
You mentioned your opening remarks. You referenced two of the films he was in, two of the Rat Pack films, Ocean's 11 and Sergeant's 3. And I was kind of hoping that in the actor section, that there might have been some, some clips from some of the film and television work that he did. And I was just wondering, was it a question of just time, or were there a problem with rights possibly, or did you feel that it wasn't necessary?
No, in the first version, we had a 2-hour cut.
A lot of it was rights, a lot of it was time.
Yeah.
We concentrated on Broadway and a few of the TV shows.
Yeah, we initially in the first assembly, we had some images. We had some clips from The Rifleman when he was in. We had a couple of clips from his anthology series he had done for Dick Powell's Productions. We had a couple of clips from A Man Called Adam, but rights and time, we had to lose things.
Yeah, thank you.
We also left out the fact that he played so many instruments. I mean, we had to leave a lot of stuff out, unfortunately.
For the American Masters versions, which Steve will probably disown, there's an extra 15 minutes of Sammy playing drums and vibraphone and piano. You'll see some more stuff from Sammy in that extended version.
Yes, in the back corner.
In the PBS special on Sinatra, it was indicated that as a result of excluding Sammy Davis, the Kennedys, that Sinatra alienated himself from the Kennedys in support, and that was in direct opposition to what's in the special that we just saw. Could you comment on how that played out?
No, I know what you're talking about. When Sammy was going to marry my Brit, they were saying to Sammy from the Kennedy, group that he should not be marrying my Brit because Frank was supposed to be his best man. And Sammy was initially going to postpone his wedding to my Brit until the election. But Sinatra told him not to because he didn't think it was necessary and he was still going to be his best man. It was then afterward, at the inaugural ball, when Sammy was disinvited, that Sinatra didn't support him. So it was two different situations.
And what happened to their relationship, Sinatra and Sammy Davis, after that incident at the White House? They were very close. They had one of these sort of very complicated relationships. There were times when there was a love fest between Sammy and Frank, and there was times where Sammy would say something or do something that he would be put in the doghouse by Sinatra. For example, in 1958, Sinatra was producing a film called Never So Few, and Sammy Davis was cast to play the role that eventually became the role played by Steve McQueen. And the reason that Sammy was no longer in that movie is because he had done a radio show where he had said some negative things about Sinatra, so Sinatra dropped him from the movie. They had that kind of relationship. Sinatra stopped talking to him when Sammy got involved with the drugs, So they had this very, very close relationship that sometimes it was hot and sometimes it was cold. Did they reconcile after his...
Yeah, I don't know if anyone remembers, but near the end of both Sammy's life and Sinatra's life, they came back out on the road. It was originally Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy, but then Dean Martin dropped out, and it was Sinatra, Liza Minnelli, and Dean and Sammy, and they performed around the world.
Yes, right here.
Is there any truth in the relationship with Eartha Kitt during the filming of Anna Lucasa, and that she was really instrumental in sort of propelling his career as an actor, trying to get him to use acting as as his #1 talent for equality?
The story that I read in Sammy's autobiography was that he proposed Eartha Kitt before they did Anna Lucasa. In the early 50s, they were involved, and she didn't accept his proposal. Then they made the movie together later. I don't know anything about that story, but they were involved in the early 50s.
Yes? So the question was whether you were conscious of restoring a forgotten legacy.
We were, and I think we succeeded in bringing the story to a younger generation. And that was part of our goal.
Yes, right in the center.
In all of his interviews, and being interviewed by the gentleman in front, he's very articulate. Yet at the beginning of the movie, he says he never went to school. Even as a child actor, did he receive any training in anything? He read his scripts very well. He could memorize scripts. How does somebody that has absolutely no education, according to him, be able to interview as articulately as he did, and be able to do what he did? Was there anything else that wasn't there?
I think he was a ferocious learner. He read a lot. After he got into the Army in World War II, he started reading books. And if you listen to him, he watched a lot of movies. He was mimicking Cary Grant. He was mimicking Ronald Colman. He was a guy who was a mimic. He was learning. He was reading. He's sort of like Sinatra. Sinatra didn't finish high school, but these guys were ferocious in wanting to be, in some way, educated. Not book educated, but educated in a way that they could articulate who they were and how they felt.
I thought he was extremely eloquent. One example is when Martin Luther King passed away. that statement at the end was just heartbreaking and very insightful.
Yes, right here.
Any never before heard stories that you wanted to add that didn't make it that you could share about Harry? I mean, not about Harry. About Sammy.
No, no, not really. No. Every story that we wanted in the film, that we had people talk about, is in the film. Yeah.
And what do you hope fans take away from this that they might not have known about him, that you hope they don't know?
What the gentleman behind you said. What did you say? He was the greatest entertainer in the 20th century.
Mr. Show Business.
Any more questions? Oh, in the back right there.
I was just curious if either one of you ever met him.
No, I never did. Never had the pleasure.
No. Saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show, though.
Yes, in the blue, right?
Well, I think what happened is that, like a lot, some, not to everyone, but some people become passé. I mean, he didn't connect with a new generation of people. I mean, also think of it this way too. This was a man who constantly struggled with staying connected. I mean, in the 50s, he was getting harangued by many people in the black community for losing who he was. In the 60s, he was at the top of the heap with Sinatra and Dean and Joey Bishop and Peter Lawford. In the 70s, he became a pariah because, he hugged Nixon. And then people felt like, well, here he is with the afro, then he's back with the Jerry, with the processed hair. Who is he? Where's he all about? And by the 80s, he was a guy who came out of the days of vaudeville. That kind of entertainment wasn't at the forefront of the American psyche anymore. I mean, when you see him doing that was it Winchester?
You mean trying to be cool?
Trying to be cool. It's sad. I mean, I stopped engaging with Sammy Davis when I got into my late 20s, and that was in the late 70s. Because to me, it wasn't like I didn't like him, I just didn't think he was so hip anymore.
We have time for one more question. I can get this center here.
The answer to that question, no, because I don't think he even talked about it in his book, and none of the people we interviewed talked about it. In answering your question about his wives, Altavis passed away many years ago. His first wife, who was just, she died, but my Brit is still alive. And we were hoping that if Tracy had said yes to an interview, she would get her mother to do an interview. But then since Tracy didn't come through, her mother was not going to be comfortable doing an interview. And my Brit still lives out in California.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.